Welcome into this week's episode of Three True Values. I'm your host, James Fletcher, with you as always. We are a couple days late getting this podcast up and to you guys. Apologize for that, as I'm sure you've been able to tell over the past couple days. It has been cold, regardless of where you are across the country. Here in Memphis, where we are recording, things have frozen over, so I was snowed in without my equipment for a couple of days, but I'm back now, got everything locked and loaded, decided to wait for the games last night to get this podcast up and to you guys. So here we go. We got plenty to talk about over the past 9 days now. I do want to start in this first segment. We'll talk about the incident that happened in the Alabama-Missouri game, talk about Nate Oats, his confrontation with Aiden Shaw, what Dennis Gates had to say about it, all that right here at the top. Get that out of the way. I've got just a brief comment, just very brief, on the Mikey Williams situation, him committing to UCF to play in the Big 12. They're going to try and get him eligible for this season. When we get done with that, just a couple of scattered loose thoughts that I've got rattling around. We'll talk about them. Then on the second segment, that's when we're going to get into what is happening. What is happening across college basketball? Is this parity? Are these teams getting lazy? Is it kind of the end of the winter break? They're having to go back to school, and so there's an adjustment period. Why are we seeing so many upsets all the way across the board, whether it's top 25 teams, whether it's NCAA tournament bubble teams, whether it's teams that looked like they were at the top of their mid-major conference, they drop a game to somebody at the bottom of the standings? Why are we seeing all of these upsets all the way across the board? We'll get into that just a little bit in that second segment. We could talk about that all day, I'm sure. Then in the third segment, as always, games of the week will get you ready for what's going to happen this weekend and into the early stages of next week. Before we speak again, do want to let you guys know tonight, right around midnight, new bracketology will be coming up at on3.com. Been working on that, been putting a lot into, so I hope you guys enjoy. Hope you're able to see where your team is projected, the potential matchups they could face. There's a lot that goes into this bracketology stuff, and so trying to get you guys the most accurate data that we can. Now, let's kick things off. Let's get into it. Alabama played Missouri. Things got a little bit chippy. The second straight game, things got a little bit chippy with Alabama. Definitely not something that Nate Oats and his staff, at least in the past, have been opposed to. They kind of like that chippy, chip on your shoulder, we got something to prove mentality. That's kind of what they try to bring on a nightly basis with that hard hat that they give out after the game, the hustle points, everything they do. They want to be blue collar. And so no surprise when it gets a little bit chippy, especially a Missouri team struggling. They've got to get things on the right track. They don't look like an NCAA tournament team. They're going to need to knock off some teams with good resumes in order to get back into that conversation. So if you're Missouri, you've got everything to play for. Big game. Alabama, they're trying to win an SEC championship. They have to pick up this type of game, especially at home. So no one's going to give in. Things keep building. They keep building. Now, next thing you know, there's a huddle. Aiden Shaw, a couple other Missouri players hanging around. People start talking. People start jawing. We saw Grant Nelson get a technical at one point in this game for talking, something that has not really been his style throughout his college career, but happened the other night. And that's when Nate Oats appears to hear or see something that Shaw has said or done. And as the ref signals to Shaw to walk away, Oats puts his hand on Shaw and shoves him the opposite direction of his players. Now, I've seen all kinds of talk about this. I've seen from Alabama fans saying that it was the right thing to do to defuse the situation. He prevented a bench clearing brawl. I don't think he prevented a bench clearing brawl. Like You know how rarely we see bench clearing brawls in college basketball or basketball in general. Usually things get handled between the two guys who need to handle them. They talk. Maybe somebody pushes somebody. Maybe. You might see that. And then the referees step in. The coaches might come and pull their own player back. And then we move on. We keep playing. We get a technical foul on both players who were involved. Now, the refs, in an attempt to try to calm things down rather than escalate them, decided not to give a technical foul to Nate Oats. I thought it was an interesting decision and one that they have the right to make, but it's not going to look good at the end of the day, right? Because a coach is held to a higher standard than the players. Well, if the players would likely receive a technical in that situation, why would the coach not? And that was Dennis Gates's point after the game. He wanted an explanation for why there was no technical foul. He was not necessarily mad at Nate Oats for what he did. He just felt that the rules say there should be a technical foul for a physical push away from a situation. And there should be under the rules. And this is where we get into referees have a lot of discretion. They're able to choose how they want to referee a game. We see some games where any contact, you see an arm come out just a little bit, it's the whistle is blown, we're going to the free throw line. You might see 40, 50, 60 free throws taken in a 40-minute game. You see other referees who say, we'll allow the bumping, the pushing. We're only calling fouls if it actively impedes their progress to whatever play they are making. All right, so then you apply that also, that gets carried over into technical fouls. You have some referees who will let you sit there and get your case across. They will let you get out all of your frustration. You can scream at them. You can tell them that they got the call wrong. You can make your case for why you were right. You can even sometimes get away with saying a few things you probably shouldn't say. Now, there are, as we know, the magic words. Everybody knows what they are. You say those, you're probably getting a technical no matter what you're saying to the referee, no matter what your point is. But generally, it's up to the referee whether he wants to set the tone that you're not going to talk to him that way, or if he understands your frustration and wants it to diffuse before it builds into more. There's no right or wrong answer on that. Now here you can argue there is or isn't a right or wrong answer because, like I said, it's a coach held to a higher standard. I tend to agree a technical foul should have been given. I think you could also make the case that they could have given a technical foul to both teams to the benches. I think that there are different ways that different referees would have handled this. These referees decided it was better in this situation to get everyone separated, get everyone calmed down, warn everyone, no more of this, and hope that because no technical fouls, because technical fouls, while they are a consequence of things getting elevated, there's no guarantee that it diffuses what got so high. Because if you feel like you were wrong by the technical, now you're even further up in your emotions. So I see the case for not giving a technical. I would have given the technical. I would have teed up Nate Oats and really, like, you know, it's shots in the ball. Like, it's not the end of it doesn't flip this game in any way. But it would be a better look for these referees who made the decision. Now, the SEC reprimands Nate Oats. They don't fine him and they don't suspend him. And this is where I've seen quite a bit of backlash from the other side, where they say, well, this guy just gets away with everything. First of all, last season, that was a player issue. We've talked extensively about that. about the legality of that situation, about the morality of that situation. There is a ton to unpack there. None of it has to do with Nate Oats being on the sideline or being fined for something he did. Now, he had those one set of comments, which he then apologized for. Those were out of line, yes. But that had nothing to do with his basketball coaching. That had to do with someone speaking out of turn and just not thinking before they said something away from the court. So I get it. There is kind of this feeling around Nate Oats, who is a very intense guy, and around the Alabama basketball program, which has had its fair share of controversy over the past 12 months. But the idea that he should be suspended for this, like, everyone seemed to agree. Dennis Gates was frustrated that there was no technical foul. He seemed to agree that there was no intention of anything other than diffusing the situation. That Nate Oats was just trying to get Aiden Shaw out of the situation. So, a suspension? Like, what are we suspending him for? I guess contact with a player. Okay. You know what I think is worse than extending your arm to get a player out of a verbal confrontation? How about closing out on a shooter as a head coach? We've seen that like 5-6 times this season, and nothing. Nobody cares. We've seen coaches sprint down the floor to the corner and like trap players. Their feet are on the court, and nothing happens. All right, so we want to talk about like contact with a player. They're not making contact, but like, come on. And you want to go even to the NBA? I mean, Taylor Jenkins, the Memphis Grizzlies head coach right here in town, he stopped a fast break. He ran out on the court and played defense against a team. And you know what happened? He got a technical foul for what he was saying to the ref. He didn't even get a second technical foul after continuing to go at the ref. He wasn't even ejected. So I just can't get behind the idea he should be suspended for what happened. Now, a fine, fines get iffy in sports because you start talking about fines, and I think in the eyes of fans, fines are a big deal. They mean something. But a fine to a coach, like, what are you going to fine him? Probably, I would say the fine probably would have been somewhere between $5,000 and $15,000. Okay. Nate Oats makes well over $1 million. All right. So, like, yeah, it wouldn't have been nice, but he would have been able to pay for it, and it would not have impacted him in any real way. Like, we hear the numbers and we're like, oh my God, yeah, they fined him. But these coaches, especially in professional ranks, these players, like, they don't want to pay fines. Don't get me wrong. But you see all the time coaches, players deciding that they're going to take a fine. Like, they have decided, I would rather be able to speak my mind or rather be able to go do this thing than have that amount of money. They're in a position financially where they can make that decision. No one cares. So it's just fines it's an odd concept to me, especially at the college level, with the inability to provide consistent punishment. Because what if a player does the same thing? Can't fine him because you're not paying him. So just a lot to unpack there. And I think it gets, it brings up so many emotions when something like that happens. Got to form an opinion immediately, and then it all gets put out there. Now, some people's immediate reaction was on this side, some was on this side. Now we've got to argue for the next 3 days instead of just kind of looking at it and saying, okay, that happened. Let's move on. If you dislike Nate Oats more because of it, Okay, if you're an Alabama fan, you say, yeah, I'm behind him. He's with us. He's our coach. Cool. Like, I think it all moves forward. It all keeps going. Nothing is going to change that. Do want to touch on just very briefly this Mikey Williams situation. Committed to UCF. He will be going to Orlando. And I think we talked last week about his decision to transfer from Memphis, all that. Well, he never entered the transfer portal officially. Then he commits to UCF. It's unclear exactly how that happened. Now, because he was only enrolled, in online classes, he did not step foot with the program physically here in Memphis. I don't know how those rules are enforced. I don't know if he had to enter the transfer portal. Regardless, UCF attempting to get him eligible to play this season per reports. And so Mikey Williams goes out on Instagram and with his commitment caption, he says, just needed a chance or just needed a shot, whatever it was. But like, what is he talking about? Benny Hardaway stood by him when he was arrested for felony gun charges. Who didn't give him a shot? He enrolled him in online classes while he was in court in California. He kept him on the roster for the season when he did not have to do that. Penny Hardaway could have dropped him immediately and nobody would have questioned it. Everyone would have understood. He didn't. He stood by him. So then you enter the transfer portal, fine. Like, you decide you need a fresh start. Cool. Makes sense. It makes a lot of sense. But in this way, to do it like this, to act like Memphis wronged you, it's a very negative sign for what's going to happen next. Because it seems there is no lesson learned. There's no appreciation here. And this is a kid who got extremely famous, extremely quick, made a lot of decisions that a lot of us would consider questionable. Okay? And look, they seemed like they were turning out just fine until this incident happened. So, not going to judge him on how he lives his life. But in situations like this, you would like to see some level of self-awareness and of appreciation for people who have helped you along the way. That just doesn't seem to be there. It's a negative sign for him at the next level where he's not going to be the star player. How many times have we seen guys who were a superstar in high school, a superstar in college even, they get to the NBA, it's not the same there. You're the 10th or 11th best player on your roster at best when you show up. At best. And that's the good ones, the good rookies. So what are you going to do? How are you going to fit in there? You're going to have to show humility that just hasn't been there so far. So that's all I'm going to say on that topic. If he gets eligible, we might talk about him again. If not, we'll probably just wait until potentially next year or whatever he decides to do in his next steps in college basketball or in the NBA. Who knows what he's going to do next. When we come back on the other side, I do want to touch just briefly on Dalton Connect, and then we will talk in depth about college basketball, where it stands as a sport as we reach the back half of January right here on Three True Values. Welcome back into Three True Values. As I mentioned, I was going to close that last segment with it, but we went a little bit long. So I just want to open this segment with it. Do want to tell you, Dalton Connect scored 35 plus points in consecutive games over the past week, scoring close to 100 points over the last 3 games. This guy is on fire. He is shooting the ball extremely well. His defense improving as the season goes along in that Rick Barnes system. And if you want to read more about what his hot streak means for his potential NBA draft prospects, where he might land on an NBA draft board, what he has to do to move up the boards, all that can be found in my latest column at On3. So go ahead and check that out. Now, do want to talk about college basketball as a whole. You know, we come on here and we talk about certain teams every week. We obviously focus a little bit more on the teams that I know well, that I follow closely, that I have connections to the programs. But we try to go all the way across the map when time allows us to, and when stories arise in different parts of the country. But over the past, I guess, week and a half now, maybe 2 weeks, we have seen unprecedented upsets all the way across the board. We saw nearly the entire top 10 of the AP poll, almost all of them lost in a 1 week span. 2 of them lost twice, Houston and Oklahoma. So we watch them drop in the polls. Then we see, I think it was 18 of the top 25 teams losing a game in 1 week. We saw bubble teams drop games, some that they shouldn't have, some that were, like understandable. Texas in real hot water right now. You'll want to check out where they are in my latest bracketology update tonight. But they are in trouble. They drop a game to UCF, but UCF has now beaten Kansas and Texas. So what is UCF? What are they? It's hard to tell right now. And it's hard to tell where anyone is right now across college basketball. You've got to basically just go on the analytics. Like it's very hard to do the eye test right now across college basketball because we are seeing parity, unprecedented parity. We are seeing teams that can get knocked off on any given night and seemingly against inferior competition about half the time. So what is it? What is happening? I think there's a lot of things at play. One is just the time of the year. Look, we flipped the calendar. Everyone celebrated the holidays. Everybody came back. A lot of teams had close to a week-long break. Now they're ramping back up. But you say, okay, but like that was the start of January. We're 18 days into January now. Yes. If things don't get straightened out within the next week and go back to how they were, that will go off the table. There is something to be said for its conference play. Look, you see these Big 12 teams dropping games. It's the Big 12. Go look at how many teams they're potentially going to put in the NCAA tournament this year. That record by the Big East for teams in the NCAA tournament, I think it's in serious danger of falling within the next couple of years, especially with the Big 12 adding some of the schools that they're going to bring into the conference next season. So there is so much at play here. The transfer portal. It brings more parity. I know everyone has this idea out there. It's been pumped to them through the NCAA, quite honestly, because they don't want this to happen. The coaches who don't want this to happen, the athletic directors who don't want this to happen. It's out there that the transfer portal is bad because it takes all this talent and funnels it all to the best team, and then it's unfair. All right, we'll go look no further than Alabama right now. Nick Saban retires. Kalen DeBoer comes in. Alabama fans are freaking out about the exodus of players leaving Alabama. But why would they leave Alabama? If this only benefits the best teams, why would Caden Proctor be in the transfer portal and all the reporters say that Iowa is the favorite to land him? How would that make sense? Is Iowa now a better program than Alabama? I don't think hiring Kalen DeBoer, who just coached a national championship game, moved Alabama below Iowa in the pecking order. So what is it? Well, it's parity. Transfer portal creates parity because you've got kids who can decide my coach isn't here, or decide that I didn't get the playing time I wanted. I can either do one of three things. I can stay and fight for my spot. Yeah, I can do that. Potentially win the spot next year. Things might be going well. That could work. That could be good. Or I can go back home. I can go close to home. I can be with my friends. I can be around people I know. I can be comfortable and just have a more typical college experience. That can work. It could not. Or you can go to the highest bidder because there's NIL money out there. There are collectives that are willing to pay. So then you tell the school that you're at, you tell your local school, you tell every school across the country, I'm entering the transfer portal. And I would like to play for somebody, but I need some money. All right. And I know that's going to ruffle a lot of feathers. Well, what? All they're looking for is money. Well, when you got out of college, if you're not out of college, then when you get out of college, are you just going to take the first job in the town that you went to college in that offers you? You know, if the local, I don't know, local barbecue restaurant, so say we're hiring, you just going to take it? No. Are you going to just go back home? Take a job at the whatever store you went to all the time growing up? No. You are going to send out resumes to all the biggest companies that you have a chance to get into, and you are going to try to get to the one that bids the most for you. That's what these guys are doing. There's nothing wrong with that. So I think it's so much of this has been propagated, just all kinds of information from the people who benefit most by this not existing. The NCAA benefits from this not existing. The coaches and athletic directors benefit from this not existing. Okay, but these athletes, some of it gets out of hand. Yes. Yes, there need to be some guide rails. But this idea that they can only transfer once, I could have transferred 8 times in college if I wanted to. I could have gone to a new school every semester, and as long as the credits transfer, nobody's going to stop me. So what's different about these players? If our entire premise, which the NCAA has gone with this whole time, is that they are students before athletes, student athlete is what they call them. Student comes first. Athlete, they are amateurs. They don't get paid. This is not a job. They are under no contractual obligations. Then why aren't they treated like students? They're treated like athletes, but they're called students. How does that make sense? We've got to get somewhere with that eventually. But beyond that, yes, that creates parity because you've got everyone dispersing to their level. The water always levels out. You don't see some mountain of talent on one roster that's not getting used, and then maybe next year they'll play. That's not happening anymore. It's going to get dispersed across the next level of teams, which means that the difference between tier 1 and tier 2 is not that large. And between 2 and 3, not that large. We have flattened things out across college athletics, and it is good for parity. It is not good for the coaches who coach at the biggest schools. It is not good for the athletic directors of the biggest schools, and it is not good for the biggest brands and fan bases in the sports. But it's also fine for them because they get these big names. They get something out of it. All right, so yeah, you lose whoever, say your former 5-star who didn't play as a freshman. Yeah, you lost him. But you bring in the senior who averaged 18 and 12 last season. All right, cool. Fans are happy with that. So the fan base, it's all about how it is presented to them, I think, and how the transfer portal and NIL is perceived. As we move forward, though, the other things impacting parity across college basketball, conference realignment, spoke about. The Big 12 is just loaded with teams. There's just too many great teams for a team to finish the season 28-3 or whatever the record would be. It's not going to happen. Same thing in the Big 10, same thing in the SEC. And so you've got to kind of accept that. There's going to be more losses, but the losses will mean less on the resume. Look no further than Houston. I mean, Houston dropped 2 games in a row. They didn't look good. They're still on the 1 line in bracketology. They're still, I believe, ranked number 1 right now at KenPom and in the net ranking. How is that so? How can they be number 1 when they've lost multiple times recently? Because everyone else is losing too. All the records are going to come closer to 500 because the talent level is closer than ever. And that's what's going to happen across college basketball over the next couple of years. It's going to take some adjusting because it's not what we're used to, but I think that we will see more and more of it. So basically, the point of all of this, the point of what I'm saying is everyone can calm down. Everyone can calm down. If your team is losing games to teams, take a deep breath. As long as they build up their resume, they're going to be all right. If your team is winning big games, that's great. Build that resume because you're going to go on a skid. You're going to go through a patch where you struggle. Some teams have already gone through that. Now they're reaching their potential. Some teams have been perfect. Not perfect. Nobody's perfect anymore. All the teams have lost at least 1 game. But some teams, they're starting to go downhill right now. They got to get back up before March. That's when you got to play your best basketball. As long as you're playing well in March, none of this matters. Build a good enough resume to get into the tournament and then play your best basketball in March. That's the formula to win in the NCAA tournament. Look no further. North Carolina a couple years ago, we've talked about that team. They were barely an NCAA tournament team. And then suddenly they're a Final Four team because they got hot in the month of March. That's what you got to do if you want to win a national championship. When we come back on the other side, we'll get you the games of the week and get you out of here. Thanks for listening to 3 True Values. This team that really has looked the part over the last week or so. They had stumbled. They kind of just played to the level of their competition for a little while. Of course, they got through the tough portion of their schedule with a great resume, which has them in the top 10 of the AP poll right now, has them as a projected 4 seed in bracketology. And finally, on Monday, we've got Kansas and Cincinnati. The Jayhawks, of course, trying to build their resume further. The computer numbers don't love Kansas right now, despite being near the top of the rankings all year long, despite having a couple of good wins, despite having a good record. The numbers just don't say that they are quite as good as some people might think. But this is an opportunity to boost those numbers, get a big win over Cincinnati, who is I think they're on the right, they're probably on the right side of the bubble still, but they are in that conversation for sure. I want to thank everybody once again for tuning into this week's episode of 3 True Values. We'll be back with you next week with more from all across the college basketball world.